So today decided to try something new. All the time people are going on Reddit and posting their questions about running and training that they have. I figured I'd look at a question and do my best to answer it, try to provide some advice and some knowledge. This question is one of the most upvoted of the past week, talking about building volume and the way to do that. So what is the rationale behind deload cutback weeks when building volume? This is a question that could reveal my own ignorance more than anything, but it's been bugging me for years, and I would love to get some clarity from the fine folks here. Just about every running plan I've seen prescribes some sort of non-linear volume increase where there's a period of increased weekly load, followed by a week of decreased load before increasing again. I don't understand the purpose of this. If someone wanted to increase their volume from, say, 40 miles a week to 52 miles a week over a 12-week period, wouldn't it make more sense to increase mileage by 1 mile per week as opposed to making more significant jumps and then cutting back? What's the rationale for choosing an uneven distribution of load increase, which then requires a deload compared to smoothing out that curve and allowing your body to adapt in a more consistent manner? Obviously, this post is in no way questioning the utility of deload weeks in the presence of excess fatigue or injury symptoms, but if volume is managed appropriately, is there any reason to include deload cutback weeks when increasing volume? So, like a lot of questions, I think it depends on the specific scenario that the athlete is in, as the answer could be different for all sorts of scenarios. So let's look at like a few of them. And let's just follow the example going from 40 miles a week to 50 plus. So let's say we've got someone who's run 40 miles a week in the past and is trying to go up to 50 plus miles per week now, but they never have before. For this person, yes, it does make sense to have deload weeks. Like if you go over 40, each time, that week is going to be the longest that this example athlete would have ever run. So if you've only run 40 before and you're trying to push to 50 and you increase, even if it's just by a little bit, like in this example, 1 mile per week, which is pretty small, that increase is still each week a new stress that the body's never had to deal with before. So little by little, there is potential to build up fatigue and get burned out. So for this athlete who's never been to 50 miles per week before, it doesn't have to be as small as 1 mile per week, but maybe they'd go up to like 40, 42, 44, and then back down to 40 again. And then maybe going like 42, 44, 46, 42, just allowing the body a chance to adapt to the new stress that it's being put under. It's all about stress and adaptation. Stress plus rest equals growth. And I think with someone who's never hit a certain mileage before, trying to push to that, every couple weeks, you're going to want to take a step back. Now, another scenario, I think, where deload weeks might not make sense is someone who's going up to 50 plus miles a week, but has already been there before and it's just building back up to that. Let's say you've run a bunch of 50 plus mile weeks in the past and you just had like an injury period or take some time off or down or coming back after a season's over and you're building back up to 50 plus again. In that person's case, like they've gone through and handled 50 plus mile weeks before. So in that scenario, going up in mileage, I don't think you need to rely as much on deload weeks. The body has been through that stress before. So I think for that person, you could go straight into it. I don't know if I would go like 12 weeks, only going a mile per week to get there. I think if you are going to have a steady increase, it's better to kind of just get up to that mileage sooner if you've been there before and you can handle it, versus kind of wasting your time just adding 1 mile per week or however small increments you've got. Just build up to that mileage you're trying to hit and try to maintain that, stay there, stack weeks on top of each other at that mileage instead of worrying about like constantly building throughout an entire block. Try to get to that mileage earlier and maintain that. So in general, you've got a lot more like freedom with what you can do if you've done that kind of mileage before in the past, even if it's been a little bit. Like a year or two ago, I had like barely run or done any serious training for 2 or 3 years. And it went from doing basically nothing, like 15, 20 miles a week, to running about 80, 90 in 2 or 3 months. Now, if I had never run 80 or 90 miles per week before, that'd probably kill me. But like I'd had that training history and enough of that like baseline fitness that I'd already built in the past to rely on to be able to make that jump. Because when you are first hitting a new mileage, it's gonna suck a little bit. So in high school, for my first 2.5 years, I never ran more than about 50 miles a week. And then junior year, I wanted to push up to 60, 70. And 60 was okay, but I remember that first 70-mile week was just brutal. Like I was crawling by the end, just legs were so dead. And I was just kind of happy that it was over. But you do that again, you do more 60, 70-mile weeks, and all of a sudden, like 50 miles a week is a distant memory, and running 60, 70 is a cakewalk. And then you push up to 80, and that kind of sucks. And it always sucks the first time. Like my first 100-mile week was the same thing as that first 70-mile week. It's just tiring, you're shot, your legs feel like pudding. But the thing is, you go back to it. Like last summer, I hadn't run a 100-mile week in 4 or 5 years, and I did one like up at altitude, up at running camp, and it was really a breeze. Like it wasn't that hard. Like I wasn't shot at all. That's even with like a 20-mile long run with lots of climbing. That's with being at camp and playing around and working all day. Like 100 miles a week, no problem. And then like 80 miles a week the next week, it was just a breeze. Despite not having done that for years, just that past training history allowed me to do that. So for newer runners, for people who haven't hit certain mileages before, that's when you want to be careful. That's when deload weeks definitely make sense. But if you had that training history, I wouldn't worry about it as much. But if you are someone with that training history, what I would say is, let's say you do have a 12-week block where you're like building up and hit a certain mileage and you're trying to kind of ride that and maintain that. I would kind of have a budget of down weeks, like every 3 or 4 weeks of your block, like allow for like one down week. But no, don't necessarily structure it, but have that to be able to use it when you need it. Because there's definitely going to be points where you're going to get tired or something's going to happen. You might get hurt a little bit, have something come up. Like that's when down weeks can be like really great for you. Like if you're feeling good, you don't necessarily have to take one. Like if things are rolling, you might as well keep them rolling and just save those down weeks for when you might actually need them. So now that we've kind of answered the question, let's look through some comments, see what they have to say. Deload periods are fairly standard across other athletic sports, lifting, etc. The training process is a constant cycle of stressing the body and recovering stronger. Building mileage increases stress, so I guess it makes sense that at some point you need to increase the recovery time. I think your example of building from 40 to 52 in 12 weeks is very conservative, and it wouldn't really need a deload. The idea is really to push the mileage intensity to the point where the deload is needed and beneficial as it allows recovery and the adaptations to occur. So yeah, this comment is kind of saying what we were talking about, where it'd be more advantageous to build up to that higher mileage and maintain it, and then use those deload weeks as you would actually need them. All right, let's look at another comment. In general, the body tends not to do well with constant linear load increase. In the plus 1 mile per week scenario, you still get cumulative fatigue. Maybe the aerobic system can keep up, but muscles, tendons, ligaments, and the nervous system don't do that so well. Cortisol would also remain in an elevated state this way, suppressing hormones for growth, recovery, and immunity, increasing risk of injury or illness, and it would be more mentally taxing. So, yeah, I agree with what this comment is saying, and I think it's especially true in this scenario that we talked about, where someone is going for a new higher mileage that they haven't hit before. And if you don't take that time to deload, even if the increases are fairly small, like each week is still a new stress that the body hasn't had to deal with before. And if you're giving it that new stress, you want to also make sure you're giving it like adequate rest as well to be able to adapt to that and actually make use of the training that you're doing and be set up to be able to handle future training better. All right, we'll look at one more. It allows you to build volume much more quickly. If you do a fairly typical 3-week build, 1-week deload schedule, you could reasonably build to 75 plus miles per week in the same 12-week period. 1 mile per week is not a very large volume increase. Nothing wrong with it, but it's often not practical or necessary to follow such a conservative approach. That said, regardless of the rate of increase, it's a good idea to build in an easy week periodically, though perhaps less often. Your body is still experiencing a fairly high level of physiological and mental stress from the training, and that fatigue will build up. Deload weeks allow your body to recover from this. Another important point is that a reload week does not necessarily need to be lower volume, just lower effort. I often incorporate low intensity impact cross training or even long easy runs during deload weeks. So the first part of this comment, I think, goes back to what we were saying before. If you're someone who has run 75 plus miles per week, going from 40 to that in that 12-week time period is probably okay. But if someone has only run 40 miles per week, jumping up to 75 miles per week is a little too aggressive. In general, that 1 mile per week, or like very small like increments, like increasing increments, it's just not really the way to go. Like in either scenario, you kind of want to have a different strategy where if you're hitting a new mileage, you want to go up a little bit, probably a little bit quicker, and then take the down week. Or if you're someone who's hit that mileage before, you want to just get to that mileage and stay there. Like that super small increase just doesn't seem ideal. And that is a good idea with the cross training. I've talked about that in previous videos, and I've done that before, like personally, where like those shorter, easier runs on those weeks, you can replace with cross training. You'll leave the important stuff like tempo runs, long runs, like actually run through those, and then do the like maintenance runs as cross training. That could be a good idea during those deload weeks, especially if you're really using them when you need them and you're like injured or hurt or sick or something. So hopefully I've answered this question fairly well. If you like this kind of stuff, let me know. There's all sorts of questions on Reddit getting posted all the time, and I could definitely try my best to answer those in future videos. But yeah, that's a little bit on the question of increasing mileage, deload weeks or not.